Welcome, everyone. I'm Justin Silverman of the New England First Amendment Coalition. Thank you for joining us for another 30-minute skills. For those here for the first time, welcome. These monthly lessons are a quick and efficient way to hone your reporting skills and build on your First Amendment knowledge. But they're also more than that. As those who join us every month already know, these lessons are a way for you to reconnect with a community of journalists, researchers, attorneys, and academics. To everyone, please use the chat to introduce yourself, showcase your own work, connect with others. Also, make sure you register for our upcoming lessons on how to create your own podcast and how to learn vibe coding, among many other classes. Registration links and all previous lessons can be found at nfac.org/30minute-skills. Today's presentation is focused on how to create a nonprofit newsroom. It is supported in part by the estate of Gloria L. Negri. Gloria was a trailblazing journalist at the Boston Globe for more than 50 years. This program is part of her legacy of newsroom education and her lifelong commitment to local journalism. You can learn more about Gloria and other NEFAC supporters at nfac.org/supporters. During today's presentation, I again encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat and share your own experiences and resources. We have a lot to cover and not a lot of time, so let's get started. Brian, all yours.
Thank you, Justin. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the NEFAC community. I'll quickly just give you a brief overview. I'm an attorney at the law firm Eckert Seamans. I'm an attorney in the corporate practice group, so I work with corporations, for-profit, and also nonprofit organizations, and enjoy that work tremendously, helping them kind of form the entities and with the day-to-day operations when legal questions come up. So happy to speak with everyone and kind of go over. I'm hoping the takeaway here is you get a good understanding of the legal steps to form a nonprofit newsroom, kind of maybe on a big picture level, and thinking and certainly to be thinking about what are some of the issues you need to contemplate and maybe do a little bit more research and digging on before you enter in and start this venture of being a nonprofit newsroom. I think the first question I would suggest, or I think we should tackle, is why form a legal entity? Why form a separate and distinct entity to operate this nonprofit newsroom? And that's important in the context of a for-profit commercial venture or a nonprofit venture where we're working on some community effort, charitable sometimes in nature. We want to set up a separate, distinct legal entity to operate that venture, operate the organization. And the reason we do that and want to do that is to shield your personal liability. We don't want you to be personally liable for the activities of the nonprofit or the for-profit business. And one of the biggest, risks would be if you don't take this step to form a separate legal entity, you could become personally liable, and if you're in a dispute, there's a lawsuit against the unincorporated nonprofit, and you're personally liable, your personal assets could be used to satisfy a judgment. So, the classic example is we want to avoid your house, if you own a house, becoming a target for a lien by a judgment against you. So setting up a distinct and separate entity is very important in that step of creating that shielding and separation of your personal liability. Also, kind of a bigger picture item is to think about, all right, what are the differences conceptually between a nonprofit, a for-profit, a 501c3 organization, or charities in general? I think for-profit, I think we all understand that. That's a commercial venture where there is an owner of the company or owners of a company, and the company is, doing commercial transactions, raising up revenues, and those profits that it obtains are distributed to the owners of the business, right? That's the classic commercial transaction, or commercial entity for undergoing commercial transactions, right? What we all are familiar with. The nonprofit, the biggest distinction is there are no owners, right? So there's no owners to benefit from the profits of the organization. So any profits that are generated are going to go back into the organization, or forward to the organization's mission, right? So no one's getting a personal benefit from the activities, any profits that are generated from the organization. A kind of a subset of nonprofits would be the 501c3 tax organizations, and this is a 501c3 is a tax designation you can obtain through the IRS, and it comes with tax benefits, right? And one of the bigger benefits for a nonprofit who seeks the 501c3 designation is, when obtaining donations from donors, getting gifts from people who want to support the mission, well, it becomes tax deductible for them, which in turn could increase the amount of their donations. So they're going to receive a tax benefit. They're more apt to donate a larger amount of money to your organization. And charities are a subset of that. So charities are obviously organizations that are trying to do some type of public good, some community effort to help a segment of the population. The raising money, and the money goes to that charitable cause. And that's a subset of the 501c3. 501c3 largely are charities, but there's other entities that could be a 501c3. The classic examples are religious organizations, educational organizations, and also newsrooms. One of the largest newspapers in the country, the Salt Lake Tribune, recently, in the last few years or so, reorganized itself from a for-profit enterprise into a nonprofit 501c3 organization, and they have the tax benefits there of being that 501c3 organization. So with those bigger pictures in mind, why we want to set up a distinct entity and what types of entities could be falling under the nonprofit newsroom. Just want to go into the steps, the basic steps in forming a nonprofit, separate, distinct organization where you can operate out of. And really it comes down to 7 basic steps. I've got them listed out here. I'll go into a little bit more detail for each one. We have the name choice, form of entity. Is it going to be a corporation, an LLC, or something else? Registration, where we need to register to create that legal entity. There'll be all sorts of agreements, number 4 there, contracts in essence that you're going to have to either put together or enter into as you're continuing to operate. EIN number 5, that's employer identification number that we get from the IRS. Insurance, always a big piece. You want to make sure you have the proper and adequate insurance coverage to ensure that you have, if any problems come up, any accidents or anything, any liabilities that could be covered and mitigated by insurance. You want to have those insurance policies in place. And the first 6 really kind of go for any organization, nonprofit or for-profit. Number 7 is distinctly for nonprofit entities like a nonprofit newsroom, of course. So the first step, choosing a name, and this is an important one, often gets overlooked. You'll see in my slide here, my first kind of bullet point is the oops, and I'll just relay a real world example of where choosing a name is very important in how it can hurt you if you don't take the proper due diligence to figure out what is the best name for your organization. And quickly, I had a colleague I was working with a few years ago who had a client come to them who had started a business, a for-profit business. It was a restaurant, a barbecue restaurant, had started a few months ago. Things were going great, gangbusters out of the gate, doing very well. Came to my client to expand the operations. I think they were getting a liquor license, needed some assistance from an attorney. In that process, they received a cease and desist letter from another restaurant in another state with the same name. That other restaurant had trademarked the name, and now we're claiming that this new restaurant was infringing on their trademark. So when they formed their company, they didn't really do any due diligence on available names. And they ran into a problem. They were faced with having to rename the organization from a legal standpoint, redo all their marketing, their websites, even down to their menus and signage in the restaurant. So costly mistake, and we want to avoid that. So first step, choosing a name, you need to do some due diligence. That includes going to the Secretary of State's website, whatever state you're going to form the entity in. Typically, it's a Secretary of State that you register the entity with, and they're going to have a database online. You can search available names. And that way you can kind of weed out and see what's out there in that state and what may or may not be available. Once the state level is cleared, you also want to do a trademark search. And you can do this through the United States Patent and Trademark Office website. They do have a tool, a database you can search, and you want to see if there's any trademarks with the same or similar name to the name you are thinking about using, because that's where you want to avoid any claims of trademark infringement. And the last one is just as important. I call it a marketing search. In essence, is Google the name, see what's out there, see if there are any other organizations with a similar name, same name, or similar mission. And this may not prevent you from registering in the name you want. It could be an entity that is out west somewhere that you're not going to be doing business or doing any activities in that state, and there's no kind of legal reason not prohibiting you from registering in your home state, but there could be a marketing issue where you can't get domain names, website names, social media handles. So when you're trying to market this new entity, all the social media properties or domain names are taken up, and it's going to frustrate your marketing efforts, or it might cause confusion with this other entity that has slightly different name. So due diligence on the name is very important, and I always recommend that being the first step in forming any type of entity, but a nonprofit certainly. The next step, number two, would be, okay, what form of entity? Now I've got 5 listed here. The first 3, sole proprietor, partnership, or a trust, really going to scratch those off the list. Rarely am I going to recommend a client to take on a new enterprise in those forms. And the reason for that is those 3 do not separate your personal liability. Sole proprietorship is you're just doing business in your own name. Partnership is you're doing business with someone else, 2 or more people in their own names. A trust sets up a distinct entity, but it does not shield the personal liability of the beneficiary. So for a nonprofit newsroom, I think we're down to really 2 choices: a limited liability company or a corporation. Both of those will separate your personal liability and create separate and distinct entities. For a nonprofit, in my experience, the corporation structure is often the best approach because that has the built-in board of directors structure. So in a for-profit corporation, there's shareholders, those are the owners. They elect the board of directors. Then the board of directors will name the officers, the president, the secretary or clerk, and the treasurer, and what other officers the entity wants to set up. And that model can be used for a nonprofit where we don't have shareholders, but we have the people who organize the corporation and can set up a board of directors. And the board of directors for a nonprofit, I would recommend having more voices in that nonprofit board of directors. So more than just one board of director, at least 3. Odd numbers are great because you need to vote on certain issues, and we don't want to have a deadlock, a 50-50 split. And the more people involved, the better, certainly for a nonprofit venture where it's doing some type of community work. More voices from the community, the better, that have a say on following this nonprofit's mission, right? So corporation is really the preferred structure, has that built-in board of directors, which is suitable for the nonprofit type of organization. Third step is registration. So to register in just about every state, the registering is done through the Secretary of State or a corporations division under the State Department. Each state has a separate entity that handles the registration. So that's the step that actually creates the organization. So in Massachusetts, where I practice, there's an articles of organization form provided by the Secretary of State. You fill out the form, put in the pertinent information, the name of the entity, the address of the entity, the board of directors for a corporation, the officers, president, clerk, treasurer for a nonprofit, and those all become public records. So there's no anonymity, if that's an important aspect for your entity, you got to know that those directors, those officers are going to be on the public record and searchable on the Secretary of State's website. So keep that in mind, and certainly talk to your board of directors, your officers, make sure they're aware of that. Some people like to avoid that. In essence, there's really no way to avoid it if you're going to be involved at the board of director level or the officer level. There will be some certain things you also need to require or report on this certificate or this articles of organization that gets submitted to the Secretary of State, and that's the registered or resident agent. That is a person or an entity that is designated for the corporation to receive service of process. Service of process is, in essence, a lawsuit. When someone sues a corporation or any other business, they need to know where that lawsuit can be delivered to satisfy the requirements of the court. So most states will require, some call it a registered, some call it a resident agent, will require that as part of the filing. Massachusetts, where I practice, actually doesn't for nonprofit organizations. There also needs to be a physical address in the state you're going to be forming the company in, forming the nonprofit in. P.O. Box often for most states will not be a suitable or acceptable address for the nonprofit. Certainly in Massachusetts, other states generally have the same structure, but if you're in a different state, definitely worth taking a look to see if that is a requirement, because it may or may not be. Fourth step, I've put as agreements. There's certainly one big one that you're going to need to tackle in forming the entity. That's the bylaws. So bylaws lay out the management structure of the organization, including, how is the board of directors elected? What are the roles of the officers? What is the mission of the organization? So bylaws very important and required by most states by statute for any nonprofit need to have bylaws. The bylaws do not get submitted to the Secretary of State, so it is at this step a private document just internally. Some of the other agreements, you're going to be conducting business activities, you're entering into contracts all the time with vendors, with your subscribers, maybe for the the newsroom content, and all of those are contractual agreements that you're going to have to become familiar with, get to know the material terms, and certainly if you have questions, rely on trusted advisors to help guide you through those contracts. Fifth step, EIN, employer identification number. You can get this from the IRS. It allows you to, allows a couple different things. One, creates a distinct tax identification number for the entity for use with the IRS and the state taxing authorities, but also allows the entity to open up a bank account in its own name, which is very important. I always want to hammer this home when I'm advising clients. Very important to run all the financials through the entity's bank account, a separate, distinct bank account. So all the revenue, all the donations that come in get funneled into this nonprofit's own bank account. Any expenses get paid out of that bank account, right? And it's very important because we never want to commingle funds, meaning we don't ever want donors to give you money and then you put it in your personal bank account, and then with the notion you're going to transfer it later. Or you certainly don't want to ever pay your personal expenses out of the nonprofit corporation's bank account. That's viewed as commingling funds, and it will create an argument that you should not have your personal liability shielded. In essence, by commingling funds, you're pretty much doing business in your own name. We're going back towards the sole proprietor or the partner kind of partnership kind of model where there's no personal liability shielded. And if you start to do certain things, you're not following the formalities of being a nonprofit corporation, not maintaining the the flow of financials into that bank account, not commingling, there's an argument, a legal argument that could make you liable, personally liable for the activities of the organization. So we want to avoid that. Always want to stress the importance of getting a bank account and maintaining the financial distinction. Number six, insurance. Obviously, any kind of activities should be insured. You're going to want to talk to your insurance agent advisor. What policies should a nonprofit newsroom have in place, right? And it's often good to go to an agent who has familiarity with this space, with this niche, with this industry to get the appropriate coverage. You see, I've got a list of suitable, generally advisable policies, but by no means is this the only list of policies you should be thinking about getting. Talk to that insurance agent to make sure you get the appropriate coverage. Last step in the formation is fundraising. So if you are going to generate donations, solicit donations to fund your mission, you're going to want to most likely file an application with the IRS for a 501c3 designation. That will, as I touched upon earlier, will allow your donors to donate money and get a tax break, right? Get a tax deduction for the donation. It is a process to go through with the IRS. There's a form 1023, that you have to fill out. There's a lot to it. I think the application itself is 60 pages, somewhere around there. So you definitely want to take a look at that piece. If that's where you're going, that's the step you want to go. You're going to raise money from outside sources as donations. Be familiar with the 501c3 process. Kind of dovetail to that is the Attorney General in every state. They will be in charge of kind of managing or regulating nonprofits, and certainly nonprofits that are seeking donations or soliciting funds. Even if it's a charity or even a non-charity, they may fall under the Attorney General's regulations and will need to do an application or initial filing with the Attorney General and annual filings with them. So you want to keep that in mind. If you're going to do fundraising, there's the IRS piece and there's also the state Attorney General piece. And you'll have reporting requirements, all sorts of federal and state agencies. You want to get familiar with that. What agencies do you need to report to? So in the process of forming, figure out what agencies are out there that you need to report to. The ones I've already mentioned: IRS, State Attorney General, Secretary of State. There'll be a Department of Revenue, a Department of Labor, depending on what state you're in, that you might have to, if you have employees, you'll have to report to as well. And one real last, bigger topic here is dissolution of a charity. If you do go the 501c3 route, some states will require you, if you are going to dissolve and end operations, you're going to have to either just give notice to the Attorney General or get consent from the Attorney General, or even here in Massachusetts, you have to go to the Supreme Judicial Court, the highest court in Massachusetts, to get permission to dissolve that charity. So just keep that in mind. If you're not going to have a long-term goal, there will be some steps you need to take to dissolve it, which is different from a for-profit corporation. Last slide here has some additional resources: New England Newspaper and Press Association, Volunteer Lawyers for the Arts, Institute for Nonprofit News, Lion Publishers. All of these have information on their websites to help, for some of them specifically, nonprofit news organizations such as yourselves. And definitely worth checking those out. Volunteer Lawyers for the Arts, not really newsroom or news focused, but they do connect creative industry people with attorneys to get some legal assistance. So that's a good one too. I think that's in Massachusetts here. So definitely some great resources out there. I highly recommend you do check out these websites, see what they have. They might tell you what things you should be thinking about, how to do things, or maybe some resources on how to get the help you need. And that's my last slide. This is my contact information. Happy to take any questions that come in or after the meeting. If anything comes to mind, certainly reach out to me. Always want to help. I have a background in the media industry. I worked in the news media for a while here in Boston. I worked at a news radio station for many years before going to law school. So always enjoy working with and helping people who are in the news media industry.
We do have a few questions in the time that we have left. The first is a question just about general liability regarding newsrooms specifically. We talked a lot about the separation of personal finances and the nonprofit's finances, making sure that we individually, personally, are insulated from risk that might be assumed by the nonprofit itself. What other risk factors might you point to that are specific to newsrooms? I mean, immediately I think of, those risks related to coverage, like, defamation suits or contracts that you might have with um, individuals that you're working with. Maybe there's a dispute there, but are there any others that you could point to that are specific to nonprofit newsrooms?
Yeah, so certainly the issue of defamation or of privacy are big for newsrooms, right? And the downside to or the one risk with setting up a separate entity, it's great for separating personal liability, but it is not absolute. You are still going to be liable for your torts. So a tort would be a claim, a defamation would be a tort, or invasion of privacy would be a tort. So real world example, um, President Trump recently sued ABC for defamation. Now that suit was settled, but also named in that suit was George Stephanopoulos, the news anchor who spoke what said whatever he said about the Trump or the Trump administration or President Trump directly, and he was named in the suit because even though ABC is his employer, he was also named because he's going to be responsible for his torts. Same thing with a nonprofit newsroom. You're putting content out there. If you're the one who wrote it and you're responsible for any defamatory statements, you're going to be personally liable on that. So there may be some insurance coverage you can get to protect against that. So the insurance piece is very big. But the separation of liabilities is very good for contractual obligations, any disputes over contracts or other business, legitimate business activities, but it is not absolute. So you do have to keep in mind, tort liability is still going to be out there, and in this context, the defamation, invasion of privacy are the two big ones.
Thanks, Brian. Real quick, just have a couple minutes left, but is there anything to keep in mind regarding the size of the nonprofit newsroom? Do smaller ones have different considerations than larger ones, or is the process the same regardless of
So
whether?
I'll say one thing with the 501c3 designation. For smaller nonprofits, there is a more streamlined process. That form 1023, which I mentioned, there's a 1023 EZ, and that's for nonprofits who are generating donations or revenues under a certain threshold. So there is a streamlined approach, maybe for a smaller nonprofit organization that may be appropriate for you, for our listeners.
Great. And last question before we wrap up here. Give a lot of advice, great step by step. Are any of these steps doable for the non-attorneys out there? I know there are probably some steps that you would point to and say it would be good to have an attorney involved just to review the process, but is there anything that can be done to give everyone a head start on their own?
Yeah. So, the name search, that's certainly the due diligence there. You can certainly do that. Registering with the Secretary of State, generally it's a 1-page or 2-page form. You can fill that stuff out, figure it out, get it registered. The bylaws, there are entities out there that will have model bylaws. You can peruse those. Often, though, I do think there is some benefit to have an attorney review that or help draft those. The 501c3 designation, that definitely, I think, I would recommend seeking, a professional who can advise you through. As I said, it's a very complicated and complex process.
Got it. Well, Brian, thank you again. Really appreciate all your time and many thanks to everyone who joined us today. We provide these lessons as a public service to you. So please return the favor and encourage your colleagues and friends to join us each month. We have a lot to learn from each other, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon. On behalf of NEFAC, thank you. Thank you for all you do, and we'll see you next month for our next 30-minute skills. Goodbye, everyone.